Well, welcome everybody to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. Today's show, NFL Legends, will feature a man that I think Vincent Turner, and by the way, Vincent Turner is our co-host. Jeremiah Long is our producer today. Please forgive me for not introducing them correctly, but I'm excited. I am really happy to be part of today's show because we're going to talk about somebody today that is not only beloved, he's not only a historical figure, but I think as much as anybody out there, he is an adored NFL veteran, legend, player, participant in the league. And today, of course, we're going to talk about Walter Payton. And Vincent, there are very few people that have the pulling power, the star power, and the absolute love and admiration of fans and players alike like Walter Payton. Tell us what your thoughts are initially when we knew we were going to do this show. I had a little jump in my giddy up. How about yourself?
Well, basically here on 100 Yards of Football, Harper, before you joined the great team here, I did 2 videos on Walter Payton. So today it's an honor to have you, an NFL guy that's played in the league 11 years, to do this video with me. And when I thought about Walter Payton and bringing him back up, I thought about so many great stories in my life, how he impacted me in loving this game of professional football. And as I said before, and I'm going to say it again, I didn't have the opportunity or I wasn't talented enough to play in the NFL. And Walter Payton was a guy, me growing up and watching my father, love to you today, Mr. Chester Turner, down in my hometown of Memphis, Tennessee.
Yep.
He was the one guy that really was my favorite guy that I followed. And by you, Harper, playing in the league and knowing how tough it was to play in the league back in the 70s and 80s, I can tell you this today. It's going to be one of the most memorable, enjoyable moments of my life. I'm going to start with Mr. Walter Payton. He's out of the state of Mississippi. And anyone who watches 100 Yards of Football, I always say is something in that water in the state of Mississippi. Look at all the great people that came out of that state. I'm talking about Mississippi, the red clay, hard grass, Morgan Freeman, James Earl Jones, Jimmy Buffett, Archie Manning, Muddy Waters, B.B. King, and the great Walter Payton, along with Jerry Rice. In the first knowledge that I even heard of Walter Payton, I was in the 7th grade in 1972. I had this gym coach. His name was William Bryce. He played football at Lane College out of Jackson, Tennessee. And I remember the morning of September 25th, 1972, he will always address the gym class, and that was my first class of the day. And he said, "Gentlemen, I want to tell y'all something. And Vincent, I'd like you to stand up because you're always talking about the history of the game. But I'm going to tell you, it's a sophomore out of Columbia, Mississippi. He's going to change the world down here in the SWAC conference." And I saw the greatest running back ever. Remember his name, Walter Payton. And Coach Bryce went on and told the story that Walter Payton scored 7 touchdowns. He had 279 yards that game. And he converted 2 extra points.
Yeah.
And Coach Bryce, all he could talk about, he's seen a lot of great running backs. He talked about Jim Brown. He talked about O.J. Simpson. He talked about Willie Gallimore. He talked about Larry Zonka. But he said, this guy is going to be that guy. And from that point on, I know my father was a good football guy and a student guy. But see, I grew up, my father was a dry cleaners guy. And I never knew him to like football inside out. But I know my dad was a hell of a strong-hearted Chicago Bears fan. And when Walter Payton was a member of the Bears, the greatest joy of my life was sitting down watching the game with my father and how he would get excited. So there's only 2 athletes my dad ever would get up and just shake somebody and have you just in a room excited. It was Muhammad Ali and Walter Payton. Walter went on to Jackson State. You know the history from there. And now look at the 1974 All-American team that year. In the backfield on the national level, you had Anthony Davis, you had Joe Washington, and you had Archie Griffin, who was a two-time Heisman Trophy winner in that 75 draft, right? I mean, in the All-American team in 1974. Nobody hadn't even heard of Walter Payton. Then when he, I believe, went fourth overall in 1975 draft, I remember it was people still on the national level. Oh, he played at the SWAC. Oh, he didn't play against no competition. I think today we see that different now. And the one thing about Walter Payton, he was tough, but everybody loved him. Everybody respected him. He went to an organization that wasn't winning. That's first and foremost. His first 7 years, the Bears only had 2 winning seasons. And on top of that, they only made the playoffs 2 times. Then think about who he had at the quarterback position. Gary Huff, no disrespect. Bob Avellini, no disrespect. Vince Evans, no disrespect. Mike Phipps, no disrespect. Then the coaches, Jack Pardee, no disrespect. Neil Armstrong, no disrespect. But he finally got a former Bear in Mike Ditka, and he finally took a quarterback in 1982, a gentleman by the name of Jim McMahon, that my man who's on the screen with me today, Mr. Harper LeBel, saw play up close and personally. And you saw how that Bears organization changed. But the greatest thing I remember about Walter Payton is when he stepped in Chicago. And remember, I told you a few seconds ago, my father, Chester Turner, is a diehard Chicago Bears fan. And I thought about all the tradition before Walter Payton got there. Bill Wade, Ronnie Bull, Willie Gallimore, J.C. Caroline, Dick Buckets, Mike Ditka, and Gary Sayers, Doug Axson. And they had all that history. And then this guy, Walter Payton. Remember, he played 7 years for the Bears, really got respect. And then they brought their quarterback out of BYU. And the rest is history. The 85 Bears is the greatest single-season team in National Football League history. And the gentleman right there, Walter Payton, was behind that. I'm going to give it to Mr. LeBel. And one thing I'm going to say about Walter Payton, that not only we could talk all day about what he's done on the field, the greatest running back ever, we can put him in that class. There's going to be a lot of argument there. But when you know a person is great, in my opinion, it's when everybody loves and respects him. He was like God in the Windy City. To you, Mr. LeBel.
Yeah, he was an historical figure, that's to say the least. Born on July 25th, 1953. There is some controversy of whether he was born in 53 or 54, and that was obviously when he died. They weren't sure of that, but out of Columbia, Mississippi. Went to John Jefferson High School. Back then, there were some integration issues, and you had segregation in schools that were playing football, sports, athletics, band. Everything that was a part of after-school activity would be intermixed with 2 schools joining together. He was a drummer, loved music. He ran track his first couple of years, 1 inch short of 23 feet on the long jump. He was a singer in the choir, but he didn't play football until his junior year. He waited until his brother Eddie Payton, and Eddie's a story unto himself, a great athlete, a wonderful player, had an NFL career, but not quite as long as Walter's, in the league for 5 years. But he didn't want to interfere with Eddie's time on the playing field. So he waited until Eddie was gone. So his junior and senior year of high school, he ended up playing. His numbers are fantastic. He was a guy that would make a difference right away. And he still continued to drum and play in the band. He played basketball. He averaged 18 points a game in high school when he was playing there. He also was a baseball player. So he was a well-rounded individual, wasn't really locked into one thing. And I think that really helped him as an extrovert, or a guy that, loved comedy. He would be pranks that he would do with people all the way up into the pros. When he died, there were people that were still telling, if you were on the wrong end of one of Walter's practical jokes, that meant he liked you. But in many respects, when you put itching powder in your jock strap or something like that, no one would think at the time that, hey, he likes me. But that's just the type of individual that he was. Your thoughts about his high school? Anything that I missed, Vincent?
Only thing I can say is this about his high school. As you mentioned, Harper, he played 1 year. And then in his senior year, what really amazes me is that he only had one major D1 school that recruited him. That was Kansas State. No disrespect, but today I got to tell like it is. There was no SEC school recruited Walter Payton. I'm looking at Ole Miss at the time. They had John Valdez, the head coach. I'm looking at Tennessee at the time. They had Bill Battle. I know, I got to say it, Roll Tide. Y'all love Bear Bryant, but I can't believe and don't understand why Alabama wasn't knocking the door down at Columbia, Mississippi. Because Walter Payton had a hell of a senior year. Then, of course, Georgia, Vince Dooley, where you at? Florida, where you at, Doug Dickey? And that really is going to stick in my mind till I go to my grave. And then he goes to Jackson State and ends up with a career of 3,600 yards. And I believe 54, 64 touchdowns, some outstanding, incredible numbers. And as I said earlier, he gets to the draft and the Bears, the Hallis family must knew something. They said, we're going to take him 4th overall. And I remember being the ages of 13 and 14, and I remember reading the little articles. And then remember, I have a lot of relatives in Chicago. I'm not putting you on blast this morning, but I remember one relative told me during a family reunion, Vincent, what are we doing drafting this guy, Walter Payton, that we don't even know nothing about? I said, hold your horses, pump the brakes. You're going to have one of the greatest that ever played the game. Back to you, Mr. LeBel.
Yeah, his high school, obviously, you mentioned the fact that Kansas State was the only school that was really interested in signing him. He ended up, I guess you could say, it's not officially linked to this as we talk about it today. He decommitted from that, decided to go to Jackson State. He wanted to stay close to home, and he did. And what a difference maker he was there. As a guy that could play as a freshman in 72, he got to participate, 73, 74. Those years also, he was Black College Player of the Year. He had 30, how many touchdowns? 24 touchdowns his junior year. And he was a Player of the Year also in his senior year. I'm looking at some of the stats right now. He had 1,029 yards, 19 touchdowns. He was a kicker. He kicked extra points against Lane College. You mentioned that. He had 279 yards. He had 7 touchdowns and 2 extra points in the same game. He was a kicker. You may remember with the Bears, he would do that every now and then. And he would warm up and kick all the time. He had 46 points total by himself in that Lane College game when he was in college at Jackson State. 3,600 total yards. He was an All-American. He played in the College All-America Bowl against the Pittsburgh Steelers. There is a highlight if you go out there and look at it where he made Jack Lambert look like, whoa, I'm not going to catch this guy. He had several nice little moves in that game. But that, you got to remember, back in those days, the college seniors would train for several weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, to get ready to play the Super Bowl champion Pittsburgh Steelers. And it was a no-brainer. They weren't going to win that game, but it was just a highlight game that you get a chance to showcase yourself. Kind of like the East-West game or the Shrine game or the Mobile, Alabama, the All-Star games that they had. And long story short is Walter was a difference maker. What I thought that he did and learned how to do when he was younger is to keep his feet moving. When he would get contact, he would brace his feet into the ground, but then he would move one or the other, keep them moving, and it made him so much more difficult to bring down. If you tried to shoulder tackle him, if you just arm tackle him, if you hit him with your forehead, it didn't matter. He would bounce off that. Incredible balance. He was an amazing, powerful runner. But you mentioned the 1975 draft, number 4 overall, the first-round pick of the Chicago Bears, and he ends up going to a team that you mentioned with Jack Pardee, The old George Hallis ownership and managing partner there, Jim Finks, was the general manager, and they struggled for years. Vincent, one of the things about the Bears that I thought is that he would run for a team that even if he had 2,000, 4,000 yards, it wouldn't matter. The team wasn't very good. They had to rebuild themselves. His rookie year, 1975, 196 carries, 679 yards. He averaged 3.5 yards per carry. He had 7 touchdowns that year. Had a little bit of an injury. And during the offseason, Coach Jack Pardee had noticed there was an injury, and the toughness was brought up. And Walter trained like he's never trained before. And if you remember, he would have this hill near the creek where he grew up in the offseason, and he would run that hill with his brother and with other teammates, and he would work on his leg strength, he would work on his speed, he'd work on his endurance. And it was a training situation that was it was unlike anybody else's. And that's where I think he got the explosiveness, the high knee. He would run in 3/4 to 1 inch spikes, not your standard and just sprint up this hill and do it again and do it again. And his workouts were amazing with the amount of power, the endurance, and the speed that he would build up. What a difference maker it made. That second year in the league, he got 1,309 yards. He almost doubled what he had gotten the previous year, and history was going to be rewritten from there on out. You mentioned, Vincent, his rookie year and some of the other coaches. The Bears struggled a little bit. They had to kind of get their way. Their defense was okay, but they offensively, you mentioned the different quarterbacks. How do you think that came into play in terms of helping and mold his personality from a football perspective to still be a team player, but yet we've got to have other pieces of the puzzle before we're going to be any good?
Look how the game is played today. If you got poor quarterback play, do you think you'll have a player or a running back like Walter Payton that would have been gaining 1,300 yards in his second year in the league?
You'll be able to run, but you know what? You're probably not going to win. And that's the thing. You have to do both, at least in today's game. Now, back then, yes, it was run first down, run second down. If you needed it, you'd run on third. But more often than not, it was 3rd and 5 or plus. That's when you would pass.
If you go back, and I don't know the stats for Bob Avellini, I don't know the stats for Gary Huff, I don't know the stats for Vince Evans and Mike Phipps, but in comparison, think about them and you look over all their stats, I guarantee you their pass and completion percentage is not very high. They probably didn't have a lot of touchdowns. And make a long story short, they had no passing game with those guys under center. And I'm not trying to really say anything bad about those guys, but Walter Payton was everything they had. And you just kind of brought up an excellent point. Run Walter first down. Run Walter second down. Give me that stat again his second year in the league. Well, how many yards he had? 13,
1390 second year, yeah.
They went 7-7. Think about if they had any passing game that year. They might have been a playoffs team. And I'm remembering 79. If I'm not wrong, that's the year they made the playoffs, and I think they played the Dallas Cowboys. I could be wrong, either 77. I think they won the NFC North. They defeated the Dallas. They lost to the Dallas Cowboys in the opening round. But I think he had a hell of a year that year, one of his best years. As a matter of fact, in 77, he was the MVP. But even still, he didn't have great quarterback play. And when you look at a guy playing during that time, just be realistic here. Think in your mind. Walter Payton was everything the Bears had. They was very average on defense. And here's a guy that can keep moving the chains 4 or 5 yards a pop. But you brought a very excellent point, Harper. The way he kept moving his legs. And as my great business partner told me yesterday, Ronnie Keebler, he's the most outstanding uphill runner that's ever played in the National Football League. So think about all that and just think how the Bears were constructed and think about his toughness, man. His toughness. And one other thing I want to bring up about Mr. Payton, one of the best maybe ever blocking backs that ever played in this game, pass blocking. Just go look at his highlights on YouTube. Is I'm wrong? Back to you, Mr. LeBel.
Yeah, it was an amazing, complete player, right? He's 5'10", 200 pounds, a small guy, even NFL standards, below average in many different ways. But he gave everything that he had. If you want to look at the highlight, it's go look up Walter Payton. I believe you would throw in Dennis Johnson, because the block that he had on Dennis Johnson when Jim McMahon in '85 came back into the game. Well, he didn't come back. He had been sat against the Minnesota Vikings on a Monday night game. The Bears were losing, and before halftime, Jim says to Ditka, he goes, "Hey, I'm ready. Send me in. You sit down over on the bench, Jim. We're fine without you." Third quarter, eventually in the fourth quarter, Ditka relented and he put Jim in. First play that they have, Jim audibles. He drops back to pass. He wants to go deep with Willie Gault. Dennis Johnson, linebacker for the Minnesota Vikings, blitzes right up the middle. Walter Payton cuts him in one of the great blocks of all time. He allows Jim time to get rid of the ball. Next thing you know, a touchdown. And before you know it, they're coming back to win that ball game. So Walter was a complete player in many different ways. Obviously, Matt Suey was blocking for him on numerous occasions, but they would interact with one another and switch it up. Suey would carry up the middle, and Walter would put his head in to a much larger, bigger defensive end on numerous occasions. He was an outstanding pass catcher as well. People forget that. He had 400. I'll look it up in a second. I have it here somewhere, but please forgive me right at the moment. He had over 400 receptions. There are some of the great receivers of all time that don't have anywhere near the amount of catches that Walter had as a receiver in the backfield. He doesn't have great yardage. I think he had 15 touchdowns, but obviously he leaves the game as the number one rusher of all time. He has since been passed by Emmitt Smith, but he's still the guy of all the guys that everybody looks up to. He was the one that nobody can take this away from him. They may gain more yards than him. They may play longer than him. They may have more touchdowns than him, but when he left the game, he was the all-time leader. That's one of the things that I think is great. I played with Steve Largent. He was the same, had 100 receptions. He was a league leader in receptions, in touchdowns, and in yardage at the time. Record since been broken, but he was number one when he hung up his cleats. And Walter has that same distinction, and so many others that come to mind. I'm glad that your father, I'm glad that your business partner, I'm glad that there are so many others that say, you know what, this guy was a difference maker. It was fun to watch. Even though they were the lovable, losable Bears back in the day, they corrected that, and he gets himself a world championship. A little bit of bitterness, though, wouldn't you say, Vincent? Because he didn't get to score a touchdown in that Super Bowl against New England early in 1986.
It's no question about that. I mean, it hurt a lot of people on a lot of fronts. To this day, I still don't understand what Mike Ditka was doing as the head coach, and him being a former Bear. That really sticks out of my mind. But Walter being the person he was, you saw he handled that situation with character, because he didn't want to take away from that great season or that team performance in the Super Bowl that day. He could have really took it to another level, but if you look at it, look how he handled it. Of course he was disappointed, no question about it. But that's what we loved about Walter Payton. Not only was he a great football player, but just a great person. I can't remember any player, any coach, anybody ever saying anything negative about Walter Payton. And I'm going to leave you with this. The day of his funeral, November the 1st, 1999, I watched it on CNN. There was a teammate who was crying. You could go back and watch his funeral. He had on his sunshades. And I saw this guy up close and personal when I was a true freshman at the University of Arkansas. It was Dan Hampton. And what he said about Walter Payton, the day of Walter Payton's funeral, it still brings almost tears to my eyes. Dan Hampton said, you can go back and look at the video on CNN. He said, one day I have a daughter, and I'm going to be able to tell her that I played with the greatest football player that ever played this game in Walter Payton. Think about that. Think about that today. That's a serious, serious comment coming from a great Hall of Fame player, Dan Hampton. And that still puts my eyes a little watery today. And I see Dan Hampton. Matter of fact, when we finish today, I'm going to go watch that video on YouTube. Ain't no more to say, man. Great people
Yeah.
come in your life for a lot of things. Great players come in your life for a lot of things. But with Walter Payton, there's no better. And what really amazes me, that he played at an HBCU school. And you got all these other outlets, HBCUs, and you don't hardly see anything about Walter Payton. We might see a story here and there. People are taking it for granted. But you know what? This is the greatest day of my life, because we're not going to take Walter Payton for granted here today. One of the top 3 players in the game. Ain't no more to be said. And not only a great player on the field, but off the field. Community service leader. So much he did for the Windy City. What more can you say? Back to you, Mr. LeBel.
Yeah, my one encounter with Walter, and by the way, before I get to that, I did watch the funeral. I watched, you can find it, folks, if you go online. The Chicago News had hours of coverage on this.
Mm-hmm.
They did the actual funeral itself, which was more private, where a bunch of players, there was Richard Dent was there. You mentioned Hampton. Kevin Butler was a part of that. Mike Singletary, Jim McMahon was there. Mike Ditka was there. Paul Tagliabue, the commissioner of the National Football League. John Madden went to his funeral, at least the private one. Obviously, all of his family and friends and non-football people that he knew were part of that as well. But really, the cameras were put in the face of all the players and coaches and the commissioner. And what a great loss that it was. And every one of them that spoke talked about the difference that he made in their lives, about obviously the Bears with the championship and the Super Bowl victory, and the team that subsequently was still pretty good. But that Walter was nearing the end of his career there in '85. He only played for 2 more years after that. So the end was nearing in terms of his playing career. But so many different ways that he was a good influence, a positive one, to them, their careers, and their lives, to where they would travel wherever they needed to go in order to be there for Walter. So that spoke volumes to me. I got to meet him once, 94. We were playing in Atlanta. Atlanta was playing in Chicago, and at halftime, it was probably one of the worst games ever played. I think 6-0 was the final. Go look it up. It was a terrible, horrible football game. But at halftime, they honored him. And I don't remember there being a marching band or anything like that. And the acoustics in Old Soldier Field were terrible. The echo that you would get with the speakers, they've since changed that. And then obviously they've rebuilt the stadium. So it's much different now than what it looked like back then. But they had finished honoring him, and he had come back out onto the field. If you're sitting in the television booth, you would know that to the left, near side of your TV screen is where the Bears locker room was. On the far left side, up at the top of your screen, if you're looking at the 50-yard line, that's where the Atlanta Falcons came out. So I come out of the tunnel. I'm with our punters and kickers. I got to get ready to go snap. And I noticed that Walter was waving at everybody and going towards the locker room. The ceremony that they had for him that day, whether it be retiring his number, just acknowledging his Hall of Fame status, whatever it was, I had missed most of that. And Walter was leaving. Third quarter, probably 5 minutes left to go in the third quarter, I hear people starting to cheer. And he came back out, and he was wearing his gold jacket. And he went from that lower left-hand side across your screen from left to right along the Bears sideline, and my hand is going opposite where it should be. Forgive me, folks. But he's just waving. It's like there's a parade, and he's the grand marshal, and he's just saying hi to people, shaking hands with a few of the guys on the Bears, going from one end of their sideline to the other. Then he circles around the stadium, comes to our side of the field, still waving, all that. Our team was on defense. The Bears were mounting a drive. They would end up kicking a field goal. So they were going to what would be the left-hand side of the field. The right-hand side was where Walter was coming from. And I went over to say hello to him. And he's about the 20, then the 30-yard line. I walk over to shake his hand, and he says to me before I get a chance, he goes, "Where's your coach? Where is Jerry?" I said, he's over here. You want to go? He goes, yeah, I want to go. I want to meet your coach. I would love to have played for your football coach. What a guy. I'd have had so much fun. And so now I'm escorting him. I'm not taking him by the hand, but I got my hand on his shoulder and I walk him over. I go tap. He stops at about the 50-yard line. Jerry was on about the 20, 25. And I tap Jerry on the, there's a game going on. I tap him and then there was a timeout called. And I say, hey, Jerry, there's someone that wants to meet you right over there. And I just had a smile on my face. He looks over and he's, Walter, how you doing? And he raises, takes off his headphones that he has, and he gives them the biggest hug, and they embrace as if they've been old friends. And that to me was so cool. Chris Hinton, Chris Miller, some of the other players on our offense were just spellbound. They're looking over and go, that there he is. That's the man right there. That's Wally. And he was an amazing guy. Everyone on the sideline stopped what they were doing to go look over. A few of them shook his hand. Chris Hinton grew up in Chicago, Northwestern. He was our right tackle. They knew each other, so they had an embrace there. And Walter stayed on our sideline for about another 5 or 10 minutes. He did not do anything close to the same thing like that on the sideline. I don't know what it was. I don't think if he wanted to talk to Dick or what, he probably already had that relationship with several of the Bears of that era. However, for a Falcon and for him to be on the line for as long as he was, and for me to get a chance to meet him real quick and just to introduce him to where Jerry was, that is still a memory that I will hold dear for the rest of my life. But Walter Payton was certainly a difference maker. One thing I want to say about Walter before we go, when he broke the record, he received a $2 million bonus from the Bears. And instead of taking all of it, he ended up deferring that money. He took $200,000 and he had that coming to him for the next 10 years. Financially, he was a much better off guy than a lot of people would think. Very savvy. I would never have thought of doing anything like that until I heard Walter's example. I ended up having 1 year where I deferred my check. I waited. I didn't need the money right away, but I wanted to have it when I needed it for tax purposes, whatever, different ways of looking at things. And Walter Payton was certainly an entrepreneurial spirit and ownership in the NFL teams that were available, bringing St. Louis back, for example. That's one example. Bringing the Rams to St. Louis after the Cardinals left and gone to Arizona. Walter was a part of that, a small part. And he wanted to be a minority owner, but he definitely had business savvy as well. So an amazing human being, an amazing leader, and obviously one guy that would be of a very few, Vincent, and I'm wondering what Chester would say if you asked him, if you could start a club with anyone in the world, who would you start your NFL club with? There are many that would say Lawrence Taylor. There are many that would say Dion. They would say Reggie White. But I have to admit, especially after the research that we've done, Vincent, that your father might consider, and obviously we as well, might consider adding Walter Payton as our number one pick if we were to start an organization and a franchise.
My final words today here about the greatness, sweetness. For almost 10 years, my barber here in Douglasville, Georgia, played nose tackle for Jackson State. His name is Grady Jameson. And one day I said something about Walter Payton, and he almost literally told me to get out of his chair and let him go to the bathroom. Because this guy, Mr. Grady Jameson, loved Walter Payton. Loved him to death. And Mr. LeBel, by you asking me that question, there's no doubt. My father be 88 years old, February the 26th. The following year, and hopefully in 2025, it's no question Walter Payton will be his number 1A, number 1B, number 1C. And when I think about Walter Payton, I think about me being a true freshman at the University of Arkansas, going to a party, listening to this band out of Dayton, Ohio. Their lead singer was Mark Wood, and they had a song that was a hit in the 78 year. It was All the Way Live with Mr. Walter Payton out of Jackson State University. Back to you, Mr. LeBel.
Well, there's so many things that you can say in what we've now done in about a 35-minute show, and then you start thinking about, gosh, there's still more. My final image for everybody would be watching the ball out, wristbands, elbow pads, the headband that he wore during the Super Bowl year with McMahon, spatted shoes. He wore black shoes and he wore the white tape around him. The high step and high kicking. There are so many great memories of Walter doing a stride and running with a different pace than everybody else on the field. There's no way to fit all of that man's life in a half hour, but we'll try to do our best job of just honoring him in a way that we signify the importance that he had on our lives, on the lives of his teammates, of course, throughout the league, and just throughout the United States of America. He's a fantastic person. We know we lost a good when Walter passed away, but a Hall of Famer without a doubt. And hopefully he has a Hall of Fame presence in your hearts as well. We appreciate you staying tuned in with us throughout our NFL Legends shows that we have today. We got the chance and the honor of honoring Walter Payton. Greatness, as you said, Vincent, is all over it, but his nickname was Sweetness, and we appreciate all that he did for the National Football League, for football in general, in college and high school, and for his contribution to society. So thank you for tuning in today. For Jeremiah Long, for Vincent Turner, I am Harper LeBel. Thank you for being a part of 100 Yards of Football. The NFL Legends Show with Walter Payton is complete. We appreciate you tuning in and being a part of it. Have a fantastic day, everybody. Thank you for watching.